All right, thank you everybody. Today I'm going to be presenting on TAK UI, multi-platform TAK development in TAK UI, and some of our next steps. So basically I'm going to start by giving a background and motivation for the project. I'll spend a bit of time going over our design philosophy for TAK UI, some of our capabilities, and then diving a little bit into some of our multi-platform support. And finally, if I have the time, I'll spend a little moment talking about what I think is next for the project and next for the TAK ecosystem from my perspective. So what is TAK UI? Basically, it's a GOTS library for TAK development. So we're developing it at Booz Allen Hamilton, formerly PAR Government, before we were acquired. And it's actually available now to anyone with tak.gov developer credentials. So I'll have a resources slide at the end with some links that you all can take pictures of. And I believe these slides will be on the website as well, if you want to reference them there. So basically, it's just a modern UI development library for TAK. And why you'd want to use it would be it greatly simplifies ATAK plugin development and maintenance. So I don't know how many ATAK specific developers we have in the room, but between legacy Android and the TAK platform itself, it can be quite hairy at times. There's a lot of boilerplate that can be necessary. So TAK UI consists of a number of different utilities to make life easier for developers. Another reason why you might want to use TAK UI is it's actually compatible with pretty old ATAK versions. We've tested it going back to ATAK 4.2.1. So as opposed to something like Jetpack Compose, where it's really only supported on recent ATAK versions, if you have a customer that requires something to target legacy ATAK, you can still take advantage of the modern development tools that TAK UI provides. Another nice thing about TAK UI as compared to something like Jetpack Compose is it's basically just a wrapper to the platform's underlying native widgets and styling. So you don't have to muck around with having a UI that kind of looks out of place because we're literally just using the platform implementation. So you get a consistent look and feel to the underlying platform you're deploying to. And then finally, eventually, and I think this is probably one of the biggest selling points of TAK UI, is really where we want to go with this in the future is to allow you to share both UI and business logic between all the different TAK platforms. So essentially what that means is rather than writing a plugin first in ATAK and then porting it to WinTAK and TAKX as separate efforts, we want to allow you to be able to write your plugin once and deploy it to any of the different TAK capabilities, including eventually in the future platforms such as ATAK and WebTAK. But right now what we're working on, the three basic platforms, ATAK, WinTAK, and TAKX. So I say eventually there because that's a little bit of a work in progress, but that's sort of where we want to go with this. So a bit of the design philosophy behind TAK UI, we use something called fine-grained reactivity. So the most popular framework that uses something similar is called Solid.js. And some of the advantages of that are it's really easy to reason about because you're explicit about what types in your application have reactivity. It's also very high performance. If you look at some of the JavaScript benchmarks for different frameworks and stuff, those using fine-grained reactivity are usually pretty close to the top. So it allows you to write high-level, easy to reason about code that's also fairly performant. And beyond that, in addition to just those kind of modern UI development capabilities, we also want to provide high-level bindings for everything TAK. So there's a lot more to TAK development than just those basic widgets that you have in your pane or whatnot. And we want to have the same kind of modern developer experience that something like Jetpack Compose provides, but for everything in TAK. So TAK UI has utilities for things like map widget manipulation, map object manipulation, and we want those to be as easy to write as it is to write your reactive UIs. We have specific APIs for things like custom radial menus. So if you're used to ATAK, generally to do that, you have to do a bunch of manual management of broadcast receivers and things of that nature. TAK UI makes that a lot simpler. We just have a really simple declarative API for that, and tons of other things that I'll get to with the rest of the presentation. So this is how you declare a plugin in TAK UI. You can sort of think of this TAK UI plugin block as kind of a plugin manifest. So this is basically where you declare different hooks into TAK that your plugin provides. So the basic one here, plugin tool, is essentially just a toolbar icon that you can click on and do something in TAK. So this is super simple to specify. And again, compared to traditional ATAK development, this cuts down on a ton of boilerplates. And this also has the nice aspect of cutting down on some manual management of life cycles and things of that nature. So if you're used to building a traditional ATAK plugin, you know that you have to register things on an on-start and an on-stop so you can properly clean up resources. So if you place some markers on the map or something, you don't leave those on the map once your plugin disposes of itself or the user closes it out. TAK UI handles that for you automatically. So you just have to register things and it'll automatically handle the lifecycle aspect in the background for you. So this is what a TAK UI user interface looks like. So basically, instead of XML, we use this Kotlin domain-specific language. And if you want to, you can kind of think of it as a different syntax for XML. So rather than having the angle brackets, you just have these curly brackets that denote your blocks. And you just have your UI layouts, your columns, your rows, and your various UI widgets. And the nice thing about this is it gives you the whole power of the Kotlin programming language. So you can abstract things out into different functions. You can use all the constructs you're used to, iteration, for loops, conditionals, can all be embedded directly in your UI, which makes things a lot easier in certain instances. It's also, this one's a bit subjective, but arguably it's easier on the eyes and a bit easier to read than XML. And as part of this API, we also allow for performant data binding to Kotlin state flows. That's the construct we use for reactivity in TAK UI. So that's how you would achieve more advanced data binding. And finally, we also have an interesting component API, which allows you to specify input and output data. I probably won't be able to get too much into that today, but essentially what that allows you to do is have APIs for things like reusable data entry forms, very simply. And so that's an advantage that we actually have over something like Jetpack Compose. We actually make that easier than Compose itself. Okay, so another kind of interesting thing with TAK UI is this aspect of a tool. And this is essentially an abstraction we have that wraps things in ATAK or TAKX, such as coordinate selection dialog or the shape entry tool, modal dialogues, anything like that, where you're basically prompting the user to do something on the UI, and you want to get some data out of it. We modeled this using Kotlin coroutines, but the tool class provides some additional niceties on top of that. First and foremost, that cancellation is automatically handled. So if you're used to doing this kind of stuff in TAK without coroutines, using the raw callback and broadcast receiver-based APIs, you'll know that it can be very finicky, and you have to make sure that you're manually handling every case where a user might cancel out of a dialog or something like that. TAK UI handles that for you automatically. Basically, the default behavior is if you cancel something in a sequence of asynchronous actions, it'll automatically short circuit and cancel the entire thing. So it's a lot nicer to work with, a lot less error prone. It also makes the code a lot easier to read because it's a lot easier to see kind of what the control flow is of your application rather than having your business logic spread around all throughout your application in these different callbacks. So this is just an example scenario for that. So this is a button with an on-click action where we execute a tool. Basically, the scenario is here. When the user clicks this button, we want to prompt them to select a map object. And then with the data from that, we want to open a modal dialog. And with TAK UI, it's super simple. You could write this literally in 2 minutes or less if you know the framework. So basically, tool.seek is our sequence. And then you can see we have a coordinate selection dialog. Rather than having to register a callback, we just directly grab the selected marker, and then we use that to launch an alert widget, which is the API for a modal dialog. We also have a navigation API built into TAK UI. That's pretty straightforward. You basically just implement a navigation target per screen you want to have in your application. And we have these nav-to and nav-back methods to handle navigation. So there's no need to use an obscure library or roll your own fragment backstack. This is just a built-in capability we have in the framework. Finally, one thing that's really nice for TAK UI that even the users will appreciate, the TAK UI includes enhanced error handling by default. So I don't know if anyone here has ever been out in the field and they've had an issue where they have an error with the plugin and it crashes ATAK. That kind of sucks, right? You know, ideally as developers, we try to make that not happen, but mistakes happen. You know, you run into weird edge cases out in the field that testing in an office somewhere, us or the QA team wouldn't run into. So if you're using a TAK UI plugin, instead of crashing all of ATAK, we show you this dialog, and we give you the option to attempt to restart it, or just quit and go on with your life. So this may not always happen, but in our experience using this in plugins, this should catch probably like 90–95% of errors, and does not require you to use a hard ATAK restart or, God forbid, anything like a boot loop. So that's a major win for TAK UI plugins. Another small nicety we have in the TAK UI monorepo, this is really useful if you are doing GIS stuff in your plugin. We have this library called rasterflow, which basically just makes it super simple to load and write rasters and do various raster manipulations with things like map algebra. We do also have some work in progress support for vector data processing utilities, but most of this is kind of revolving around manipulating rasters. Okay, and this is basically our multi-platform capabilities where we are right now. So again, we have that kind of common vision that I pointed out earlier. You have one code base and you deploy that to all your different platforms rather than having to pay a development team 1, 2, 3+ times for targeting all these different platforms. So this is work in progress, but we are currently using this multi-platform capability in 2 of our plugins at Booz Allen, 4 in general. And this is the same API that we've seen so far. All this kind of stuff, you can just write and automatically deploy it to these different platforms as long as it's part of the API that we've implemented. So there are, because this is work in progress, some features that are missing or unimplemented on the TAKX and WinTAK platforms. So I'm not saying this is going to work perfectly today, but it is something we're using and something that we're working on right now. We have project templates available for ATAK TAKX mixed projects or ATAK TAKX WinTAK mixed projects. One of the caveats there is because to target WinTAK, we're using something called Kotlin multi-platform. If you want your plugin to target WinTAK, you actually cannot use Java or JVM dependencies. You have to use a pure Kotlin project. However, if you do have some Java-specific dependencies you want to use or some Java source files, that is still supported if you want to use a shared project between ATAK and TAKX. This is basically what that looks like. So this is just an example UI. This is actually a plugin that we have on tak.gov. We call this our TAK UI Hello World plugin. Eventually, we'd like to add more examples and make this more fleshed out like the ATAK Hello World plugin. But we have a couple things up there now. You can build this and see it, how you have your single code base, and you can write the same UI, write the same business logic, and have it target ATAK, TAKX, and WinTAK. And as you can kind of see here, we're just using the basic underlying UI widgets. So, it's the same layout, the same content. Users can kind of go between the platforms and they'll get the same thing by default that they're used to, but it's going to look native to that platform because we're just wrapping those native components. As you can see, the TAKX example, the alignment's kind of off. The TAKX is a little bit newer, but our goal is to make a layout consistent between platforms and then use the native widget styling. Okay, and this is just a case study from one of our plugins at Booz Allen. So this is a plugin we're developing with a shared Kotlin base that targets both ATAK and WinTAK, and over 75% of the code is shared. So that's 75% of the code that you didn't have to pay to write to port to your different platforms, and we just get for free, having that same common functionality between platforms with the same capabilities. So bottom line, decreased maintenance burden and development costs compared to kind of the state of the art today where you have to have separately maintained plugins. All right, and I think I've got a bit of time left, so I wanted to talk a little bit about my personal ideas for the future and the vision for TAK UI. I just wanted to clarify, this is nothing set in stone. This is sort of just my vision for the future. But kind of the problem as I see it right now TAK UI is a lot of different things. So we have Kotlin-specific utilities, both for general UI development as well as TAK-specific kind of stuff, right? Then we also have this kind of cross-platform API for TAK development. And then we have all the implementations of those APIs for each of the platforms we're targeting. So kind of what I want to ask and kind of pose to the TAK community is, what would it look like if we decoupled those Kotlin-specific utilities into their own library? Kotlin's great. I think Kotlin makes it easier to write TAK plugins, but not every team's going to be experienced with Kotlin, and maybe you have some existing code in another language that you want to reuse. I think that we should be able to do that with TAK UI, which you're not currently able to do since we're based on Kotlin multi-platform. So, what would it look like if we separated those Kotlin utilities out and we moved that cross-platform API closer to TAK kernel and the actual core platforms? And I think if we do that, we kind of solve another problem as well, which I kind of started hinting at, which is, there's a lot of existing TAK UI code, TAK code out there. I've got 929 projects just that I have access to on tak.gov. I'm sure there's more, and multiply that by however many thousands or tens of thousands of lines of code, and that's a lot. That's a lot of investment that folks have put into the TAK ecosystem, and we don't want to use that, or we don't want to lose that. So there's a lot of pre-existing TAK code in C#, Java, C++, even Python, and really what I want to ask is, how can we port that and take advantage of that existing code in a TAK UI plugin? And furthermore, how do we do that in a cross-platform way? And the answer that I have to that I would like to propose, again, going forward in the future, with enough investment, is that we investigate using WebAssembly. So for those who aren't familiar, WebAssembly was originally created to allow for low-level languages to run efficiently in the browser. But even though web's in the name, really it's about a lot more than that. So WebAssembly was kind of built from the ground up to allow for secure execution and sandboxing of code. And that was kind of in mind from the beginning of the project. And there's these runtimes out there that allow you to execute what are called WebAssembly components and embed those as part of a larger non-browser application as plugins, which sounds exactly like what we do so much at TAK, right? This really is what WebAssembly was made for. You have this high-level interface description language that allows you to define an API for communicating across those programming language boundaries, and the component model, which allows you to easily compose those components written in different languages. So for instance, you might imagine that you have a component for your calculation engine. Maybe that's written in Python or something. Then you have the code for the kind of front-end UI of your application, maybe written in Kotlin, maybe written in C#. And you can use the component model to combine those into a single binary that you can then ship as a unitary TAK plugin. And with the tooling that's provided with WebAssembly, it's made super simple. And you don't have to kind of figure out that dance for each of your separate platforms. You can just deploy your WebAssembly bundle to all of the TAK platforms. So this is kind of what I have in mind for the future, what I want us to be working towards as a community. You have the capability to choose one or more languages for your TAK application and to build on top of the TAK Product Center's unified plugin framework, which is currently a JavaScript engine but does have some support for WebAssembly. And with that single TAK plugin, you can deploy it to any platform and have those advantages of sandboxing that WebAssembly native provides. So that includes things like we've already been doing in TAK UI with better error handling and stuff that you get for free using WebAssembly because it's built with that kind of security model from the ground up. Another thing that we'd like to do going forward in the future, dreaming big a little bit, is we also want to provide first-class support for cross-platform testing. So this is actually something I prototyped a couple of months ago. This is kind of what we envision. In addition to being able to write a plugin and have it target multiple platforms, we also want to be able to write test scripts that can test things on different platforms. Because you can deploy things to as many different platforms as you want. That's great, but you still got to test it on those individual platforms because they're different platforms. There's no guarantee that even if your business logic is the same, they're going to behave exactly the same way. So in addition to reducing development burden, we also want to reduce testing burden and CI burden as well, and provide those unit tests or integration tests that you can run in a cross-platform manner. And so yeah, as I promised, here's a resource slide. Leave this up for a second, but again, this is on tak.gov, so you should be able to have access to those links as well. Oh yeah, sorry, I also want to mention here, yeah, so we have the repository, we have those various sample projects we mentioned. I do also have a tutorial, which should be available to anyone with tak.gov developer access. The tutorial is currently a little bit out of date, but this is something that we're planning on updating for the upcoming TAK UI release. So I would imagine within the next couple months, hopefully that would be a bit up to date. But I still think this is a useful resource today, just some caveats. Some of the code examples may not be exactly the same. But yeah, that's pretty much what I had.
Greetings. Thank you for the presentation. Do you happen to have a timeline of when you might see multi-platform or when you might include WASM?
Yes, so again, the WASM support is kind of far off in the future thing. This is just my idea. We don't currently have a contract for us working that, so we do not have a timeline for that. In terms of multi-platform support, you can use it today. We just don't have all of the different components implemented. So I would say right now the multi-platform support is in alpha, and unfortunately we don't have a super clear timeline on when that exactly is going to be ready, because we essentially are working this under contracts for specific customers. So right now, we're basically only working this as necessary to support specific plugins that we're porting to this TAK UI multi-platform. So hopefully in the future, we'll get a kind of more broader contract to be able to work and specifically flesh out the utility. But unfortunately, right now, I don't have very specific timelines.
Hi. I was wondering if TAK UI, as it stands currently, is it feature complete in that any, for example, Android UI component could be replicated through TAK UI? For example, something like a recycler view. Is there an equivalent replacement to that through TAK UI, and is it performant for Android systems the way a recycler view would be?
Yes, so we do actually have a specific wrapper for recycler view that is fairly performant. We use a diffing algorithm. So to answer your question more generally, I would say yes. It's hard to kind of know exactly where the goalpost is on that, but we're currently using this in 4 of our own plugins, so I would personally say it's feature complete. And yes, we do have utilities for recycler view specifically that still have the performance characteristics of recycler view, but makes the API a lot simpler to use.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Well, thanks, everybody.